There are signs that the next God of War title is properly starting development, plus a big internal change at Ubisoft, a delay for a 2023 release, and more to discuss. So a lot to go over. Again, the news is brought to you by some different voices this week, as with Jordan on holiday, Tom and me, Dennis, will be taking over. Let's start with a minor delay, as Alan Wake 2 will release 10 days later, so on October 27th instead of October 17th. The reason behind the delay, according to the official announcement, is that October is an amazing month for game launches, and we hope this date shift gives more space for everyone to enjoy their favorite games. In case you need a refresher, October sees the release of Assassin's Creed Mirage, Lords of the Fallen, Forza Motorsport, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and Spider-Man 2. On top of that, many people will likely still be caught up on the big September releases like Starfield or the Cyberpunk DLC. So a very packed month, which is why I think delaying the game, if only by 10 days, is a smart move by Remedy. It's also kind of funny how, with the delay of Alan Wake and the earlier release of Mirage, it looks like everyone is just trying to stay the hell away from that Spider-Man release date. And speaking of big Sony franchises, we got a rumor this week that work on the next entry in the God of War franchise is starting to pick up. Reason for this rumor was a new job listing for a new unannounced title at Sony Santa Monica that has the following as a requirement: must have knowledge of God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok 2022 and be able to speak in depth about the combat systems, mechanics and enemies. Which of course heavily implies that the next project is using the previous two games as a foundation. Now we also know that Santa Monica is spread out on a lot of different things, which is what Cory Barlog mentioned to the LA Times shortly after Ragnarok's release. And Jordan has already speculated that there could be multiple God of War projects in the works next to a direct sequel like an Atreus spin-off or a multiplayer game. I'll leave a link to the video we made on the topic in the video description. We at least know that Tyr will play an important part in what's coming next, as game director Eric Williams already hinted that he is giving clues on what's next for the series. And Tyr actor Ben Prendergast reportedly also mentioned that Ragnarok isn't the last you've seen of Tyr, further adding fuel to that fire. Whether that means Tyr will feature in that spin-off game or the next main entry, we don't know. The new job listing makes no mention of multiplayer whatsoever, so we can at least rule that one out. It will probably be a while before we hear about it anyway, if the previous games are something to go by. Ragnarok's teaser was released in September 2020, more than 2 years after the release of God of War 2018. If that's the standard we're going by, we'll be hearing about the next God of War title by the end of 2024 at the earliest. But even though we have little information, the studio seems to be on the right track, as head of PlayStation Studios Herman Hulst felt totally inspired by everything he saw when he visited the studio in May this year. In the meantime, I'll be patiently waiting until we get to see what the studio is cooking up next. Before we move on to some big news from another game studio, if you've been enjoying the Sunday news video, then be sure to leave a like, as it really helps us out, and subscribe as well, as we do one of these every week. And next week should be a big one with all the Gamescom news to cover, including of course new info on Assassin's Creed Mirage. And while we've heard a ton about the plans for that franchise going forward, it's a bit quieter when it comes to other big Ubisoft IPs. Although we did get an important new update on one of them, as the Far Cry franchise found a new IP director in Drew Holmes. Longtime fans of the series will definitely know his work, as Holmes worked as a lead writer on Far Cry 5 and before that also worked on games like BioShock Infinite and Saints Row. Holmes teased there are big things in store, and while we have no solid info, early leaks sound very interesting. At the start of the year, Insider Gaming reported there are 2 Far Cry projects currently in the works, a single-player entry codenamed Blackbird and a multiplayer experience named Maverick. Supposedly, the setting for Maverick is an extraction-type game mode set in the Alaskan wilderness, and even less is known about Project Blackbird. But we do know from job listings that Holmes and his Montreal team have also pulled Ubisoft Toronto in to help with the development. According to Kotaku, who also confirmed the existence of the 2 mentioned Far Cry projects, the titles are being developed on the Snowdrop engine, the same engine that powers the Division games, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora and Star Wars Outlaws. I'm cautiously optimistic about all this info, as it sounds like there are some fundamental changes being made to the formula. And while Far Cry 6 was relatively well received, I think the overwhelming sentiment was that the next mainline entry needed to bring some big changes to the formula. So some good signs for the franchise looking forward. And there's more good news this week, but for that I'll pass it on to Tom.
Thanks Dennis, I'm dropping in with some announcements from THQ THQ Nordic. While they will be skipping Gamescom this year, they did organize their own showcase beforehand, featuring some pretty notable reveals. First off, remember those rumors Jordan touched on in the past about a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game based on the Last Ronin comic? Well, that game has officially been announced during this showcase. This darker, gritty depiction of the TMNT universe has players fighting through a battle-ravaged New York as the last living turtle of the bunch. The reveal trailer omitted any gameplay and dodged mentioning a possible release window, instead opting for just an in-development card. The game is being made by Black Forest Games, who have previously worked on the Destroy All Humans franchise, as well as their own gritty survival game, Fade to Silence. Most of their recent work has been deemed pretty forgettable, with mediocre critic scores to boot, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Given the pretty rad source material, this stealthy action-adventure game might be something to look forward to. TMNT The Last Ronin is currently in development for PlayStation 5, Xbox Series consoles and PC. Among the other games THQ Nordic announced, we find a sequel to their 2006 action role-playing game Titan Quest. Details on Titan Quest 2 are still sparse, aside from some decent-looking screenshots, but expect a Diablo-like game based on Greek mythology, with a hefty amount of exploration and of course tons of loot. It's supposedly coming soon to PlayStation 5, Xbox Series and PC. There's also a new South Park game inbound from THQ, although it might not be exactly what you'd expect. South Park Snow Day ditches the 2D RPG formula from the previous games and turns the franchise into a 3D brawler. It seems to feature a lot of chaos, co-op multiplayer and what looks like some sort of character customization, but it's hard to see how a game like this can be as funny as the last two role-playing games were. Either way, South Park Snow Day is planned for 2024 for PlayStation 5, Xbox Series consoles and PC, as well as Nintendo Switch. Switching over to Camp Activision, it seems the first bits of gameplay from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 have been revealed. It's all a bit jumbled and it doesn't show actual uncut gameplay, but we won't have to wait long for that, as Jeff Keighley revealed he has raw gameplay on lockdown for Gamescom Opening Night Live on August 22. In addition to that, we do already know the most important bit of information on this game, the fact that the multiplayer will kick off with all 16 maps from the original Modern Warfare 2. These maps should be quote-unquote modernized, and Activision will deliver at least a dozen new maps and more modes through DLC, but hey, we get to yeet throwing knives at each other on High Rise and Terminal again, and that already sounds pretty good to me. Circling back to Gamescom Opening Night Live, Jeff Keighley already mentioned that we shouldn't get our hopes up for big brand new game reveals. The show will instead focus on games that have already been announced, with quite the bag of new confirmations as of this week. Apart from previously mentioned titles, Opening Night Live will also feature Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, Mortal Kombat 1, Lords of the Fallen, and perhaps a bit surprisingly, Crimson Desert. You might know Crimson Desert from our previous news roundups, as this ambitious open-world action-adventure has been in development for quite some time. It was originally intended to be a prequel to Black Desert Online, but developer Pearl Abyss spun the project off into its own single-player game around 2020. The bits of gameplay they've shown in the past looked promising, but details on release timing have been hazy over the last 3 years. Hopefully we'll get some new gameplay early next week, as well as an outlook on when this game might actually release. In smaller news, Bandai Namco is gearing up for the release of Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon coming August 25th. So if brawling with mechs is your thing, their latest showcase is definitely worth checking out. They dive into the extensive lore of the Armored Core franchise and show quite a lot of gameplay, including a higher skilled PvP tournament, which looks pretty snappy. If you want to play Armored Core 6 early, Xbox is also bringing a playable demo to Gamescom, in case you're anywhere near Cologne next week. And just to close my part of the video off, I wanted to share this next leak with you guys. While the big console brands appear hesitant to produce new handhelds, more and more PC companies are having their go at these portable machines. Following Valve and Asus, Lenovo is now also getting into the Steam Deck market with their own handheld, according to these leaked renders. These leaks are most likely trustworthy, considering Lenovo's distinct product design and their tendency to follow competitors. Note that this so-called Legion Go handheld seems to be copying some of Nintendo's homework, judging by the removable controller halves on the side, as well as the big flippy stand on the back. It's all reminiscent of a Switch OLED. And while the design might be looking hella futuristic, it's likely this handheld will run the same chip as the ROG Ally from Asus does. So yeah, this Legion Go handheld might be properly unveiled in the near future, but just as a heads up, don't expect significantly better performance from this when compared to the handhelds that are already out there. And that's about it for my end of the video. I'll leave the closing remarks to you, Dennis.
Thanks again, Tom, for catching us up to speed. Next week, expect us to cover all the highlights from Gamescom, including a live reaction to the opening night live. Link to that will be in the pinned comment for if you want to join us. And of course, we'll have a big news roundup on Sunday, so subscribe not to miss it, and it would be awesome if you could leave a like on the video as well. You can also watch our Gamescom roundup video so you know what to expect by clicking on the screen. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.